Kathryn, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to leadership. I'm very curious about your experience in academia, and you've shared that kind of gives you a sense of purpose and keeps you feeling challenged and engaged. So it's always interesting to hear how people find that sense of fulfillment in their lives. But then there's a lot of things coming in terms of the leadership aspect that we touched on, whether it's AI or even just the perspective for Gen Z when it comes to leadership. So I know we're going to touch on all of that, but before we get started, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what's brought you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Mentioned Kathryn Landis. I am an executive and team coach. I focus on helping senior leaders drive revenue and team performance. I also teach an executive master's and master's programs at NYU, particularly around C-suite leaders,
Mm,
helping leaders keep their seat and helping demystify what happens at that leadership level for master students who are most likely in that Gen Z, younger millennial age
mm.
range you touched on. And I'm really thrilled to be here today and to get started.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to I just like jumping right into things. So there's a couple of things you touched on that piqued my interest right away. What are you noticing? Like, obviously, you've had experience working in the field, and now you're teaching the generation of people that are coming up through the ranks, and perhaps even seeking those C-suite positions, as you mentioned. What are you noticing? What's changing from generation to generation? What are the perspectives that you're hearing, and how does that keep you on your toes, as you've shared before?
I chuckle to myself when I hear you say that because there's a quote way back from the 4th century BC from Aristotle
Mm,
talking about the younger generation and saying they think they know everything and they're quite sure of it. So, this idea that the young generation is disrupting things and they're so different from others has been going on since 4th century BC, right?
right.
And one of the reasons why I've written so much about in multi-generational teams and how to help Gen Z find their place at work in Harvard Business Review is because I teach a lot of Gen Z students who I've asked, who here, raise your hand if you think would not identify yourself as a hard worker. Not
Mm,
one person raised their hand. Everyone there thinks they're a hard worker. Everyone thinks that they're dedicated and doing a great job. But if you ask their boss or the senior leaders, they are just up in arms,
mm,
do not understand Gen Z. And a lot of times Gen Z gets a bad rap because of the values and the changing working norms that they have
mm.
that maybe are not agreed upon up front between their leaders and the younger generation, Gen
Yeah.
Z.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's maybe to ground everyone and perhaps have some shared understanding here. What are some of the differences in values you're seeing? Obviously, one of the things I'm hearing is what is hard work and what is the right amount of work, right? Is it necessarily 60 to 80 hours a week, or do you work smarter and try to get things done in a shorter time frame? And then as long as you're getting the job done, doesn't matter how many hours you're putting in. So what are some of the different values and perspectives that are perhaps at times creating that conflict?
Yeah, when you think about maybe a baby boomer, for example,
Yeah.
a lot of those folks, they've been with the same company for a long time, right? They still were around when there were pensions. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
I think I had a pension for a hot second. It shows my age there. And there's this idea of paying your dues. You come to the office, you put in FaceTime, you got to do the grunt work because that's what I've always done. And you think about Gen X, a little bit different from boomers in the sense that they'll stay longer for stability, right? They're working to build that resume out. When it comes to Gen Z, they're staying for values.
Mm,
They've seen their parents, they've seen themselves. A lot of them entered the workforce getting laid off because of COVID-19. And so they're just not as loyal to a single employer. There's a great stat I saw that almost 90% of Gen Z either has a side gig or wants one. So they're a very entrepreneurial mindset. Why work for a company where I can do it myself? I haven't seen a company treat my family members or even me the way that I think we should be treated in
Mm,
terms of providing that loyalty so I can go out and do it myself.
mm,
So I think that's a big shift. I think also in general, a lot of Gen Z that I've read research around and actually work with, right, as students, they work to live, not live to work.
yeah.
So I think one of the proud things that the older generations, and I'm an older millennial, so I'm just in time for my midlife crisis, is that one of the things I say is, hey, I'm Kathryn and I identify with what I do. I am an executive and team coach. I work at NYU and because my work is part of my identity and that not necessarily the case for
Mm,
Gen Z, right?
hmm.
Maybe 2% of Gen Z are wired that way, but
Right.
majority aren't.
Yes. Yes. And do you see then concerns like if I'm an employer where perhaps I've got some people working in the organization and they've got side gigs, do you think that could be serve as a distraction or could it be more like it gives people a sense of fulfillment so they're showing up to work and feeling more engaged because they're getting fulfillment in different areas of their life? How do you reconcile that? Because it could be quite the dichotomy around are my employees fully engaged in their work if they've got other priorities outside?
Yeah, I would say that as an employer, what are you doing to engage them? What are
Yes.
you doing to give them meaning at work? Do they know the impact of what they do? And it might be I'm giving these accounting reports to the sales team, but what's the impact of
Yeah.
that? What does that mean to the customer? What does it mean to the salesperson?
Sure.
Creating a meaning fulfillment at work, I think everyone should have a hobby outside of work. And if people want to have a sidekick, great, as long as it doesn't interfere with what they're doing at work. And if
Mhm.
someone's really jazzed up about something outside of work, how can you connect that experience in work?
Right.
Right? So it doesn't have to be binary, it doesn't have to be in competition. How
Yeah.
can you leverage what they're really passionate about outside of work, maybe
Mhm.
inside of work as well?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things I've observed is often you've got the job title or description. So it's almost like you've created this box and you're telling people, hey, you have to operate within this box. Whereas if they've got something on the side, an entrepreneurial pursuit, that they're not necessarily constrained, right? They can seek out other ways of being creative or finding that fulfillment. And that's where I think the challenge lies for a lot of people now. There's so many ways of there, I guess the barriers to entry in creativity have been like just completely removed when you even look at us being here and doing a podcast and then being able to put it on multiple platforms. So for people now, and perhaps the younger generation as they're coming in, they're like, I don't have to be constrained to one role or one title. And I think that's part of the problem that I've observed is how do you operate outside of a box?
Yes, and I would think that's something that employers need to think more expansively
Hmm.
about. And you mentioned creativity and you mentioned create AI earlier. Creativity is what makes us uniquely human.
Yes.
Connecting with other people is what makes us uniquely human. So, as
Mm.
an employer, what are you doing to create those experiences to connect with the younger generation? I had a client one time, and she was talking about how she didn't like to go back into the office 3 or 4 days a week. She said, "I can get the same thing done at home as I can do in the office." And I said, "What does your day look like when you're in the office?" She sat with her door closed in her office. She was actually taking her phone to and from, getting water or whatever she had to do around the office. And I was like, no, those are the moments where you should be engaging the younger generation, that you should
Mm.
be mentoring. You should be putting your phone down. You should be having those conversations. That's what makes that connectivity. That's what is, driving the experience of being in the office. That's
Mm.
different than
Hmm.
being working from home. And I know return to work is very controversial and in some ways it's becoming old news because it's just happening. But I still think leaders should consider how they're showing up in a way that engages the younger generation.
Mm. Yeah. And I
And how do they
think,
make those connections meaningful? Sorry to cut you off.
oh, no, that's okay. Yeah. And I did want to talk a little bit about the return to work. Like, what are your thoughts around that? Because a lot of places have remained or maintained a hybrid type of scenario or format, whereas some organizations have been like, no, everyone needs to come back full time, be in the office or whatever the setting might be. But there's been pushback because I think during the pandemic, many people realized that I don't necessarily need to be in an office to get my job done, or I don't need to be traveling all the time for meetings, especially with Teams or Zoom, really those platforms taking over during the pandemic. So that's obviously there's pros and cons to that. But if people are able to, as you mentioned in the example just previously, achieve the same amount of work, but then have that flexibility where they're not commuting as much, they can go run and pick up their children or get things done at home in between meetings or whatever. Where is the happy medium in that? And I can see both sides of it, where some organizations are like, we're not seeing the same level of productivity at times.
So I think where it helps the most is having younger generation, right? The more junior employees
Mm,
overhearing the more senior employees, like the Gen X, right?
mm,
They can observe how they're talking on the phone in meetings, how they're operating. There's a lot of things that can be learned just by being in
yes.
the aura of someone, if you will. You
Yeah.
don't have to send them a Slack. You can just pop by when you see them and just ask them
Right.
a question. And so, who's really the deficit is actually to the younger generation,
Hmm.
but for a Gen X or an older millennial who's really good at their job, who's probably getting smushed at the sandwich generation, taking care of older parents and having kids, like, yeah, they want to stay home because they don't need to come into the
Yeah.
office. And quite frankly, they're not getting paid anymore. But
Mm,
employers need those folks to be in the office so that they can be those role models for the younger generation. But they're not getting paid anymore to do that. And
yeah.
so I think you do have to consider how you're incentivizing those mid-level leaders. And I think
Hmm.
you do have to think about what's going to be different about them coming into the office. I would argue that folks are more open to come into the office if the experience was worth it.
Yeah.
Are there opportunities to collaborate differently? Is there opportunities to be more creative? Are there ways to connect with people? Things that will move the needle forward. And
Hmm.
if you can't answer that as employer, then yeah, they're going to want to stay home because it's more convenient for them.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I think I've been running some cohorts with Gen Z. It's like an early career professional program, helping them with some of the soft skills that you don't get when you're behind a screen so much. And it's that age old saying, you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
And so helping them to understand, how do you manage up and across? How do you communicate with influence? How do you, I'm just thinking some of the things that are most popular. How do you make your boss lives easier so that you can get promoted? I said that
Mm,
on a call last week and someone was like, wow, I never thought about it that way.
mm,
And which for you and I were probably like, absolutely, that's how you
yeah.
get promoted. But
Yes.
sometimes you got to be told.
Yeah.
And if you don't have people around you that are telling you, like to call your kitchen cabinet of advisors, if you're isolated behind a screen working from your house, then you're not going to get that kind of information. It's going to be even more difficult.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of those little things that we take for granted are not always obvious. Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, because a couple years ago, there was this whole concept of quiet quitting that really was being discussed and at the forefront. And I think a lot of it had to do with people having a return to work. It hasn't been, at least I haven't seen it come up as much as it did, like I said, a couple years ago. But where is that at? And is that something you observe in your conversations? And what really, I suppose, led to the emergence of this concept of quiet quitting?
When you think about it, even right now, it's an employer's market,
Yeah.
right? It's the job market is tighter and folks are still disillusioned at work. And so they're going to write it out until someone finds out. But I think something that's changed even more than quiet quitting is this idea of how long should you stay with a company and the longevity of your tenure. I had a student say to me a couple months ago that she just really wanted to find a place to work for 6 months.
Mm,
6 months was like the gold standard of a job. And I thought to myself, you don't even know where the bathroom is after
yeah.
6 months. So
Yeah.
you haven't got up to speed. You haven't made any impact.
Mhm.
That's how much she needed to save money, to go off to fun employment, which is not working, but living off your savings.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind. This is a master's student who's just spent 2 years in a program to improve her integrated marketing communication skills, thinking about how she's going to land a gig for 6 months, then go to fun employment.
Mm-hmm.
So that just really blew my mind. And so I think quiet quitting is real, but I also think it goes right back to engagement. What are you doing to engage
Yeah.
and motivate your people? And I also think that if I could give some advice, unsolicited advice to leaders out there, is to making clear what agreements you have on your team. So one of the challenges a lot of older millennials and Gen X have with younger team members is you present the job as 8 to 5. They're going to leave at 5 because
Right.
that's what they've been communicated, or that's what they think the expectation is. But the older generation is going to stay until the project's done. They don't understand how you could sign off when everyone's still working because it's now 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So when you're going through those interview process to say, hey, these are the norms in our team, right? We all stay till the project's done. There might be a couple nights a week you have to stay to 7. Like making sure that you're upfront about what's it going to be like to be at the company
Yeah.
is so critical to make so that you're avoiding unnecessary turnover.
Yeah. And I do want to test this with you too, because yeah, you could say it's 9 to 5 and most people will clock out at 5. But given the technological changes we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years with laptops now and work phones, are people actually clocking out at 5? Because I remember when I was working corporate, emails were still coming out at 9, 10 p.m. and people are still responding to things. So are you actually done working? And how do you find that balance and set those boundaries for yourself? I know I had to at times because it would never be like even weekends, right? Things wouldn't be off. So yeah, that was something mindful I had to definitely go through myself, especially coming out of COVID-19. But yeah, in general, I still see people are still connected even when they're on holidays.
But do you see Gen Z connected?
That's a good question. I haven't spent time up making that observation, but I think you're right that perhaps they're a lot better at setting those boundaries.
Yeah. So in these cohorts that I run, most of the Gen Z employees, they don't have their work email on their phone. When they're done at 5, they are done. They're not working over the weekend. It is a complete mind shift.
Yeah.
I have my work email on my phone. I'm checking it all the time. I'm also a business owner, and so I'm more always on in the nature of my work.
Yes.
But that's what flabbergasts some of the older generations and older leaders. Hey, I sent you an email at 6 and you didn't get back to me until 9:30. What's going on?
Yeah.
And Gen Z would say it was after hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, and I don't think it's wrong. I think we actually could learn a little bit from each other.
Yes.
I don't think the way that maybe we've been doing it, and I say we because you seem to be of my age versus the Gen Z age.
Yeah, it's all the grays. Absolutely.
Yes. I dyed those grays. But we could probably do a better job of setting some boundaries and learning from Gen Z, right? And so I think that there's a happy medium that we can learn from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree for sure. Now, to change gears a little bit around AI, we've touched on it a couple of times, but with AI coming through, and I think a lot of in the entrepreneurial space, I think the message I'm hearing and observing myself is you either adopt it or you're going to fall behind. But in the workplace, it can be a bit challenging and there might be some resistance and pushback. What are your thoughts around integrating AI in the workplace, and how do you empower your employees to start using those tools, not only to improve efficiency, but even I think the quality of the work, if used appropriately, can improve?
Yes, it definitely improves the efficiency of more tenured employees. I think where it can be a challenge is with more junior employees who don't know what's good and what's not. So you have to have a base of knowledge to be able to take whatever the LLM is telling you.
Yeah.
This is what's accurate. This is what's not. This is, and you need to put things in a different context. So that's first and foremost. I think also for folks that are hesitating, I heard someone say one time, you're not going to lose your job because of AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who's using AI.
Right.
And so I would encourage you to start testing it out, small ways, right? Dip your toe into it.
Hmm.
Maybe start, if your company allows for it, recording meeting notes with something like Otter or Fireflies. Start playing around with ChatGPT instead of analyzing or synthesizing information yourself. If your company allows for it, upload it to ChatGPT and see what it comes back with, just so you start to see what the differences are and how you could be more efficient. AI can seem very scary. There was the whole Terminator 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Like, I don't think Skynet's coming right now, but I do think there could be incredible unlocks in the way that we are able to focus on what is uniquely human, like I said before, by leveraging AI. Things like creativity, things like connecting with other humans, and our own ability to curate information in a way that's uniquely our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the more you play around with the LLMs and try things out, then you can start getting better at even discerning between what's legitimate information, what's not. Like sometimes the references are incorrect. So you need experience to be able to play around and know, okay, is this information valuable? How do I employ critical thinking, even in the information I'm taking from, say, something like ChatGPT? But if you're trying to avoid it and say, oh, it's this big black box that we cannot touch, then you're not enabling that learning for anyone. And then to your point, you fall behind and you end up losing your job to someone who is using AI and who is proficient with it.
Exactly. I think a lot of, particularly in the consulting or in my industry, some of the things that were historically done by humans are being performed by AI.
Yeah.
But there are ways that you can complement what you're doing with AI. So you don't have to be replaced. It can be an augment. And
Right.
so really doubling down on the things that only you can uniquely do.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And that probably goes to the piece you touched on briefly, but just in general, there's a fear that people are going to be replaced by AI.
I'm working with a company right now. They traditionally went to market through third-party wholesalers, and that market's tapped out a little bit. And so now they're trying to go direct to buyers of larger companies. But the buyers of larger companies, they're not buying from these third-party wholesalers, but the wholesalers still find it as a threat. And what they don't realize is these are two different markets, right? And so understanding who the buyer is and how they're uniquely different. The person who's going to want to hire or is going to buy from a wholesaler who wants that in-person experience is very different than someone who's going to buy a solution that is going to work for 30,000 people and be democratizing the product.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. So now coming to the softer side of things. So we've talked about the multi-generational approach. We've talked about AI, but now, and you've touched on it briefly, but I want to come back to it and spend a little bit more time talking it through more in detail. Some of the things we had talked about before was connecting with people through curiosity and creativity, right? So how do you enable that, and what does that even look like for leaders who are in that space?
I would ask yourself, what does it look like for you to be curious? One of the great ways to connect with people is to be curious about them.
Yes.
Right? People want to be seen and heard. Putting that curiosity mindset will lead to connectivity. Looking to improve and upskill yourself, staying curious is something that, like I said before, only people can do. Only people can connect with each other. And
Yeah.
so I really encourage folks to ask themselves, what am I doing to stay curious today?
Right.
How am I keeping my antenna up for curiosity? How am I keeping my antenna up for opportunities to connect? It might just mean I'm leaving my house for 15 minutes, going to walk around the block, get a coffee, and say hi to someone. But
Yeah.
those moments can really change your energy and can change your outlook on the day.
Yeah. And I think the challenge, and I can only speak for myself when it comes to this, is it can be tough when you're not like often the conversation or even the curiosity is very surface level. And I know I struggled with this quite a bit where even in social gatherings, often the starting or the initiation of a conversation is, what do you do for work? And that's where the interest level or curiosity lies. But for me, as I've gotten older, it's more about, okay, where's the depth in the conversation? And sometimes people can match you on that, other times they can't. So that can also be, I find, a barrier to connection amongst employees or just even within your leadership. How do you navigate that? Or is it just something you accept that that's just the way things are? I know for me to be seen and understood, I need someone to really understand the depths of where I'm at or what are the things that get me out of bed. And it's not always work. There's
Mhm.
other aspects of life that I find get me going.
Mm, I think inherently people like to talk about themselves. Most people, right? So if you're someone out there who's trying to connect with a senior leader or trying to connect with someone else at work, find something that's interesting to them. Maybe, but that also is authentic to you that you actually want to know about.
Mm,
Because people can tell, they can sniff out when you're just asking questions, trying to play up to them. But
mhm,
maybe there's an article that you think they might find interesting that you've read that you could share with them and maybe you could talk about it. Maybe you saw something on their desk or in their background that you find interesting,
mm.
but legit interesting. So you
Yes.
talked about someone's work. If it starts with work, I'm always curious to say, learn what got you into that?
Mm.
What keeps you there?
Eh,
What keeps you motivated? What's it like on the job? Putting myself in that person's shoes because that's inherently interesting to me. And I can't say what's going to be interesting to someone else, but I would really give yourself a beat to say, what could be interesting to learn? What
mm,
could I find curious about this person in a way that's authentic to you to start forming that connection?
mm. Yeah, and exactly. I think the biggest piece I'm taking from that is it also has to come from a place of authenticity, right? If you're
100%.
faking the interest or you're just trying to have small talk, people can sniff that out. And then you actually end up doing more damage than good if it's not authentic.
But I'd be hard pressed that you can't find something that you could find interesting or curious about someone to really have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people are in general like interesting. I definitely see that when I'm working with clients. There's always so much behind or just below the surface that's going on. So even just getting through that in the therapeutic standpoint is often interesting. So I do agree with you that you can always find something that could pique your interest or curiosity.
Hmm. And maybe you have to start at asking about the latest movie they saw.
Hmm.
Or the latest, then you can go a little step further, depending on the context. But if it's a work setting, I would consider what are the projects they're working on? Are there any research or articles they might find interesting?
Hmm.
And sharing it with them and seeing you can have a conversation. I thought you
Yes.
might like to check this out because of XYZ. Those are the type of things that I'm telling my Gen Z cohort that I'm working with because they don't necessarily inherently think about that.
Yes.
Also, they discount their own value to say, why would someone so senior want to hear from me? Because they don't know what it's like on the front lines.
Yeah.
They want to attract or retain people like you. That's why
Right.
they've hired me. Of course they want to hear from you in a way
Hmm.
that's appropriate and authentic.
Yeah, for sure. And do you feel this might be a stretch, but do you feel there's an aspect of psychology that can be incorporated where understanding the psyche of people so you can not from a more so like a manipulative tactic, but just understanding people better so then you know how to motivate them or even connect with them? Because I feel like in my experience, so I can only speak to that, leaders don't even know themselves. So how can they know their employees? They're just sometimes leaders just on autopilot and they're not even paying attention to what's going on for them, what their needs are, what fuels their passion, what allows them to feel fulfilled. So there's so much self understanding that needs to happen before you can even understand others. So I don't know if there's what your thoughts are around that in terms of focusing even on the psychology of things, but or is that even needed?
It would be great. I
Yeah.
think it's a lot to
Yeah.
ask. I think a few tips that I always try to remind myself and other people is that no one cares as much about what you say or do than you do.
Mm.
So if you make a comment or you put yourself out there on LinkedIn or you send someone a note and they don't respond, they probably aren't thinking about it as much as you are,
Right.
right? So you're not first and foremost in their mind like you are in your own mind. I think that as a leader, it would be great if you had self-awareness of yourself and
Mm.
understanding how you're showing up in relationship to other people, but you got to start somewhere. And so I actually worked with a leader one time who hated small talk.
Mm.
She came to work and she didn't really care about anyone's kids or how they were doing, or she was like a robot, but
Mm.
that was her.
Right.
And she was the nicest person outside of the office. But when she got into the office, she was all business. I'm not saying she wasn't nice at the office, but like she was just very business focused.
Mm-hmm.
But she realized, to your point about self awareness, that other people were motivated differently. They wanted to get to know her on a human level. So she created the time to ask about
Mm.
their weekend, to ask, about their kids. She created an hour a week where she would just walk the floor and say hi to people, even though it didn't come naturally to her. Even if she was like, this is not really where I want to be spending my time, she knew that it would play dividends
Mm.
for her in terms of her relationship with her team.
And then that goes back to would it seem authentic? Right.
It was for her, she told her team, hey, I hear you that you feel like you don't know me on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try. This is what
Right.
I'm going to start doing. And I think people, if you put yourself out there in a way that's, she's showing vulnerability.
Mm.
I hear you. I'm trying to change. I'm going to start doing this. They appreciated that.
Yes.
And yet it probably didn't come off perfectly the first few times, maybe the first 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, it became more natural for her. But more importantly, she saw the results.
Mm-hmm.
She saw how people responded to her in a different way. How, in fact, she was getting better results and more output from them because they were connecting on a deeper level. And that people don't necessarily need to show up or behave in the same way that she did.
Mm.
We all have different styles, and that's okay. And she needed to flex to get the most out of her team, which is what inherently she wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. And again, just to circle back on that self-awareness piece, like you touched on, the biggest thing is knowing how you're making other people feel too. Just wanted to touch on that. Now, we've obviously talked about leadership in more so, I would say, in the workplace. What are some skills that you feel are transferable outside of work? So I've often reflected on, I don't necessarily just need to be a leader in the workplace. I can be a leader in my community and my family and society in general. What are some skills you feel are transferable outside the workplace that can help people continue that leadership role in other facets of their life?
Yeah, I think a really great way to think about leadership or the way that you interact with others is thinking about a really bad team that you're on. We've all been on really bad teams, whether that's your soccer team, whether that was a group project in high school or college, what you name it, everyone's been on a really bad team, and remembering how you felt to be on that team,
Mm.
how you showed up, what you were able to accomplish, and then thinking about a great team you've been a part of,
Mm.
how it felt, what that team was able to accomplish. And most people, when they think about the worst team, it's bad. Thinking about one of my worst teams, it was not fun to be on that team.
Mm.
But think about how you showed up in both of those situations and what you could have done differently to step up as a leader to make things just 5% better.
Mm.
And I think that's a big unlock for a lot of my students in the master's program that I teach, because they're like, I don't have any direct reports yet. And quite frankly, professor, I'm probably not going to have any direct reports for a couple of years. And to let them know that actually leading by authority is the lowest level of leadership.
Mm.
There's something called John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership.
Yes.
You've read his book, and that is the lowest level of leadership. People want to follow you based on the results that you've had or what you've done for them, right? And how you make them feel, to your point. And so you can do that in any walk of life, in any scenario. And so I would think about what are the things you could be doing in your day to day to help you show up in those ways.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, that's helpful. And I am curious, coming back to your role in academia, like how do you keep yourself grounded? And obviously, what I'm hearing from some of the examples you've shared, you're often being challenged too. So how do you keep yourself open to, or just having that level of openness that you're flexible to change your perspective based on what you're observing, what feedback you're receiving, what you're hearing from your students? What are the things that you do for yourself to not only keep yourself grounded, but ensuring that you're open and you're also learning, right? Because it's a
Yeah.
two-way street.
Yep. You might laugh at me, but I have 2 coaches and a therapist. So I have a team around me that I pay
Yeah.
to help me be better. I'm constantly learning. I invest a lot of money every year in ongoing training and development.
Mm,
And it's funny to be in the situation where I'm doing a lot of speaking because most of the time I'm the one asking questions
mm,
because I'm learning. And so curiosity is my superpower.
yeah.
And I think that I'm learning not only from my students, but from my clients, which enables me to write so many articles in Harvard Business Review and other high profile publications because they're real stories.
Yes.
They're real experiences. And I want people to be able to learn from those things so that they can approach it just a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, and it might be worth sharing, even in the therapy standpoint, is it is my job to listen, but listen, really listen. And because I often have clients, they'll be like, oh, wow, I've been talking the whole time. And I'm like, that's fine. That's why you're here. But there's so much information that's coming out. And I'm able to identify patterns and and often there's overlap even between people in terms of what they're navigating through. But yeah, what I'm trying to get at is through listening, I'm able to learn so much and observe so much and learn about the human condition that it allows me to have these conversations, but then also explore it in my writing too. Is how do I then share that information with others, especially knowing that myself or another individual are not the only ones that are navigating those situations. The human condition is often we overlap on the things we're contending with.
100%. Very well said.
Mhm.
And one of the ways your experience is uniquely yours,
Yes.
what's happening is likely happening to many people.
Hmm.
And so you can find solace in the fact that you're not alone in that.
Yes.
And that's why trying to get these messages out and learning new skills, listening to podcasts like this one could be so helpful because you can find yourself and maybe some tools and tricks that you can do to help improve your current state.
Yeah. And I think this is where I wanted to focus on your career in academia too, but I've often realized, and it was a recent reflection I had in my work in therapy was I'm also growing in the process. So it's not just that the client is benefiting. I'm also learning. I'm learning different ways of helping people or supporting people through the challenges they're dealing with. I'm also learning things about myself in the process. And I recently, or actually this past week, I came across a quote from Rumi along the lines of, I helped someone get to the top of the mountain. And in the process, I also got to the top.
Mhm.
Right. And we lose sight of that shared understanding or even working together through things. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're growing in the process too. It's not that we're just serving someone else. And the reason why I bring that up too is because a lot of the times leaders can get stuck in the why should I enable someone else's growth? I should be focused on my own trajectory. And I've seen, I know you touched on, think about bad teams. And I've seen where leaders are just focused on their growth and they're not helping the growth of their direct reports or their employees. And that's not a healthy place to be in general, even if it's just in the workplace, but even outside the workplace.
I couldn't agree more. I would say if you're working for a leader like that, look for a lateral role
Yeah.
because that's first you can learn in the present state all the things you would like not to be when you become a leader,
Mm-hmm.
when you get that person's job, and then
Yes.
look for something else where you can have someone that will invest in you,
Right.
that will help you become a better version of yourself at work and in life.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what would you have to, I think it comes from a place of fear, right? I can apply the psychological lens that there are people who feel threatened or insecure, but how do you help individuals like that navigate that aspect, right? So if I'm a leader and I'm feeling insecure that, hey, I've got someone really competent on my team, they're going to outshine me. Yeah. How do you then work with that and that discomfort that might be coming up?
I think you have to get to root to what the discomfort is,
Mm.
right? Because ultimately, many people would say having a rock star on your team just makes you look good,
Yep.
right? Because that person reports to you. And so why not unleash them and let them shine? And quite frankly, if you were hiring a team around you, you'd want a bunch of people that are better at things than you are, because that just makes you great
Yeah.
and that much more effective. And so I think that you really got to ask, to your point, those second, third level questions about what's behind the fear
Mm.
and what do they do uniquely well, and helping them to understand that there's a place for everyone. And that's what, diversity of thought and diversity of talents is what makes for a great team.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And what have you learned about yourself through, obviously, you said you're working with two coaches, therapists. What are you constantly learning about yourself through that process of just, because to me, that sounds like humility, but then also this thirst to continuously grow, as you touched on earlier. But even in that, I think there's a powerful message around what you're learning about yourself.
Mhm. So I think one of the things that one of my coaches, is called coach supervision, if you're in executive coaching, is really understanding how you're showing up with your clients. And for me, it's understanding how I might be reacting to what someone's presenting and understanding what my feelings and emotions are, making sure that I'm not taking on some of their own challenges, because I do care, right? But that's not my job to fix it for them.
Mm.
My job is help ask really good questions, help them to think expansively so they can solve the challenge.
Yes.
Of course, I can give advice. I can share some frameworks. I can share some learning, give suggestions, but I'm never going to know the situation as well as them. And
Mm-hmm.
they're the one that's going to have to execute it. So I think that's something that's been very helpful. And having people that challenge me to think more
Yeah.
expansively about my own life and how I'm showing up. And quite frankly, to your point about your patients just talking the whole time, I think my therapist, I just pay her. So I have someone that has to listen to me for an hour a week about what's going on in my life. It's an hour just for me.
Yeah.
I probably could save some money and speak to a lamppost and get 60% of the benefit. But there's something uniquely human by talking to a person, having them nod, and helping me come to a lot of conclusions I may have reached
Mm-hmm.
speaking to the lamppost,
Yes.
that it's worth it for me
Mhm.
to go to therapy. I've
Yeah.
talked to her about this. I'm like, "Are we still doing therapy?" And she's sometimes, I think mostly I'm just here to listen to you. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'll
Yeah.
pay you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Save
sure.
the phone calls to my sister."
Yeah. Fair enough. And I think part of it is, I do agree with you. There's that whole aspect of talk therapy where sometimes just talking it out, you can gain awareness, but also come to different conclusions. But then on the other side, you need someone who can reflect back what they're hearing, sometimes point out your blind spots. So I would assume that's a good therapist's role at times, is to be able to,
Yes, and that's not what you're gonna get from an LLM, just going back to
yes,
AI. So AI is not gonna notice when you're crying. AI is not gonna see your expression, or it's not gonna challenge the way you're thinking. My sister sent me an article about how you shouldn't ask ChatGPT for dating advice, and I will say that is true, because it'll just tell you why you're right and why the
yes,
other person's wrong, along with all this psychological issues that they may have.
yes,
Believe me, I've tried it. So I will no longer go into that rabbit hole. So
yeah.
don't do that either, listeners out there.
For sure. I think, and someone asked me that question recently about what are your thoughts around Chat GPT, for example, and therapy. My feedback and reflection was, I think it's a great tool to help you order your thoughts. Say if you were putting a journal entry into it, It'll organize it for you and give you some reflective questions. But the downside, based on what you touched on too, is that confirmation bias. Is it actually going to give you objective feedback? Is it going to give you different perspectives? Perhaps you really need to know how to prompt it and push it. And I think for a lot of people, their vulnerability is to get that confirmation and then just run with it. See, I was right. So yeah, it is a bit of a tricky thing, but there is definitely that aspect of the human element. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a therapist, but in general, I think you can use both and they're complementary. Maybe you don't need to see your therapist as often, but it's still needed in my mind to have that human connection.
I agree with that. And quite frankly, for me, I have a journal as well. There's a
Yes.
process of just writing things out that I don't get by writing on a keyboard. So now you're knowing all my tips and tricks to stay sane and show up as the best version of myself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And I think that just emphasizes what we talked about around self-awareness, right? And it was something I was touching on earlier too, is the more you know yourself, the better you can show up for the people around you. And I know even in like my family, it's the same, right? If I can keep working on myself and be honest with myself, I just show up differently as opposed to just not putting that time and effort into me. I definitely agree with you on all of that. Now, Kathryn, I know we've touched on many things and we've gone in different directions, but I do want to give that opportunity here as we come to a close around just in general, if there were things that you feel we didn't touch on, but that might be of value for the listeners, do you mind highlighting those things if there's something that we didn't address and you feel is relevant?
So I think we touched on most of the things we discussed previously, but
Yes.
one thing I'll add is that in the show notes, I will share with you a toolkit folks can use, they can download, and it describes different ways they can be more effective working in multi-generational teams. I think that could be really helpful for folks as they think about and navigate 5 generations in the workplace. So I will absolutely share that with you.
Yeah, no, that would be really helpful, and I'll definitely put it in the show notes. But Kathryn, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate the conversation. And now for listeners that want to learn more about you, your work, some of the things you're publishing, how can they find all of that?
Yep. You can go to my website, KathrynLandisConsulting.com. Look me up on LinkedIn. Send me a note. I'd be happy to connect.
All right. Thank you again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.